coffee and let's get started in a couple minutes. In our group that discusses topics that we can bring before this group on Sunday morning, we spent some time a couple of months ago talking about higher education, the gift that the church has in the colleges of the church and the seminaries, and decided that we wanted to explore that topic. So we're going to hit the colleges of the church today, discuss their future, the disruption and the promise that Lutheran higher education has. And when we talked about who might we approach to do that topic, it seemed like a natural was David Tiede. David has really spent his professional years in higher education for the church, both colleges and the seminary. David's a graduate of St. Olaf College. He has been a professor and also president at our seminary, and I would guess that an awful lot of the pastors who are serving in the church today came through either under your classes or under your presidency. But after his work at the college, he's been on the faculty at Augsburg College, he's been the interim president at Wartburg Seminary, currently the interim president at Luther College. He holds honorary degrees from Carthage, Augustana, Sioux Falls, Concordia, Finlandia. He is well qualified to speak to us about the colleges of the church. I was just curious, out of our gathering here this morning, how many of you attended one of our colleges, had a son or daughter, a mom or dad, a brother or sister that was it? Let's just see some hands. How many of you? Wow. We are well represented here today. Well, we're so pleased, David, that you're here today and that you can spend some time talking with us about the future of the colleges. There's some disturbing things going on, some encouraging things. We need to hear about them, and there'll be some time for questions and answers at the end. I think there was a sheet handed out. If you didn't get one, raise your hand and we'll make sure that you get a copy of that. David, welcome to Zumbro.
Thank you. Yes, I have a handout here, and you can number your pages from 1 to 10 for the quiz. It is kind of stunning to be at Zumbro. I've been here many years ago when I was representing Luther Seminary. And then first time I was here, that's when I met the Jenkins, Bob and Sue, and then Sue became our board leader and chair at one point. I see David Larson here, who was chair of the board at Luther College, so I better not do anything bad. I'll do the best I can. I am quite interested to see the number of hands that went up here, representing some direct contact with one of the colleges of the church. And so I think it would just proceed through the outline because I want to make sure I save time at the end. And what time do we conclude?
10:45.
10:45. Okay, good. And if people need to leave to go to other events, just go. I don't take personal umbrage at that if that happens. But you'll see the charge that I got on email from Dwayne Hogan. It's fairly directive, you know. It gives me my hunting license to try to raise money for Luther College, which I'd be glad to do. But at Zumbro, at our adult education meeting, discussion took place on the future of higher education for our ELCA. Concerns were raised regarding for-profit schools, online education, high tuition costs, etc., etc. Our concern is to look at the topic as broadly as possible without focusing on a particular college. I will try to do that, although kind of the examples I will bring probably would be mostly from the colleges where I was on the board at Cal Lutheran or Augsburg, but now in this interim at Luther College. This was, by the way, a total surprise. We were driving back from Arizona last April, and I got a call on my cell phone, and their presidential search had blown a tire. You know, this happens. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, how could I help? I was thinking I might be their consultant. And they said, would you be a candidate? And I said, oh, I don't know if this is plausible. We had a great time. They said, we don't want to waste a year. So I said, that's interesting. What do you want to have happen? So that's what we're working on. And they are now deep in the search, and I'm very hopeful that they will be bringing a candidate or candidates forward within this month. And they need a president who will be here. You know, at Luther College, 152 years, they've only had 9 presidents. Do the math, huh? One of them died in Jeff Baker only 3.5 years in. So that means some of those old guys were in a long time. But it also bespeaks stability. And that is the case of these Lutheran colleges. that they've had stability and leadership in a way that is beyond industry standards. Very important sign. Next week, Muffy and I are going to go to the meeting, Lutheran Educational Conference of North America, the meeting of the presidents of all the ELCA and Missouri Synod colleges and universities. And it's been great fun. I've been a part of that before, mostly kind of speaking to them, but now I'm here as an IR1. And it's very interesting to see the solidarity they feel with each other. They're all competing, of course. Gustavus and Augsburg and St. Olaf and Luther Concordia. And we take great delight if we can beat St. Olaf in football. I mean, all that's true. But when you get right down to it, we're in this together. So I think we can do that without any partisan politics this morning. And let's go through it. I want to start by saying that the Lutherans, immigrants who came to this country from Northern Europe, just built great institutions here. They seem to think that's what we should do. I think it's quite remarkable, way beyond the scale of the number of immigrants. I think, like I said, they built institutions like slicing bread. They just did it one after the other. Congregations, seminaries, right off the bat. Then colleges, old people's homes, hospitals, orphanages. It just went on, camps. And a lot of that is still lively and vibrant because they had a kind of practical discipline. A lot of the places, the traditions have come and gone in that time, and there's something that has been a kind of a stable gyroscope that's run through this history. In Luther College's case, 152 years, but that's comparable to the other schools of this part of the nation. So they did that to serve the gospel of Christ. They wanted to have healthy congregations, seminaries, camps, colleges, and so forth. They wanted to serve the neighbor, so the social ministries, hospitals, care facilities. It's been very tough to stay in some of these arenas, like hospitals, because of the scale of the economies and the way in which the government involves and so forth. They've stayed very much alive in social ministries. Lutheran Services of America encompasses about $23 billion of human services a year. It's the largest, the only thing close to it is Catholic Charities. Very interesting, and there aren't that many Lutherans across the face of the nation, but they've kind of written the book on how to do this even in a public sector. Huh? So they've done it historically by being publicly engaged. And there are reasons that they do it this way. One of my friends, many of you know Gerhard Ferde, who died a few years ago, he said, the only places that socialism really worked were the northern Lutheran European countries that were Lutheran. And I said, well, why is that? He said, well, they just thought we should take care of the needy, and the neighbor was our responsibility. And they, of course, they had state churches in those places. So what the state did and what the church did was kind of the thing. They came here, they didn't have state churches, they didn't want state churches. A lot of them really didn't want state churches, a lot of Lutherans. But they said, we still have to find a way to involve in doing public good, and not just for our own kind, because that was how you do it. So that deep wisdom comes out of the Lutheran conviction that after you say, I believe, all the rest of taking care of the neighbor and the world. The gospel of Jesus Christ is about God's unqualified promise, and the churches are here particularly to communicate the gospel so that it doesn't get confused with every other kind of religion. That's why we ordain some people, make sure the gospel gets protected. And then everything else is set loose in the freedom of the gospel to be a blessing to the neighbor of the world, home and family, public life, places of work, whether you're paid or unpaid, and in your larger set of other relationships. So in higher education, there's also a particular strength here, because Martin Luther was in fact in a university context. And in many ways, the Lutherans invented the higher education of the Renaissance, setting free the sciences especially, but also the arts and reclaiming the classical studies. I was just talking to someone who said, I was saying the next, one of the systems that we as Lutherans have to emulate in North America, figuring out how to be Christian at the same time we're not sectarian, are the Jesuits. I said, they really do this well. And this person, who was a 16th century historian, said, you know, the whole Jesuit system was built in order to compete with the Lutherans in higher education. I said, no, I had never heard that. There's a whole story to be told there, very interesting. But at this time in North America, the Catholics and the Lutherans are, I think, the two. There are lots of Christian colleges, and I'm not trying to make any negative comments about anybody, but have a particular way of engaging this that has to do with deep freedom to seek the truth, the sciences, the arts, the social sciences. No one's going to say we have Christian chemistry at any of these places. We just do good chemistry. That's because Luther said a Christian cobbler doesn't make shoes with crosses on them that wear out. He makes 30 shoes. So we do good science. And that means we deal with issues that have to do with science and faith. And we deal with them right there. And we're not all twitchy and reactive. So that's a sense of really a tremendous confidence by which we sustain this work in higher education. And you think about this in some areas like the social sciences or healthcare, or whatever, this is not simple, especially as increasingly the larger public sensibility has no faith content to it, or is maybe even opposed to the Christian faith. But both the Jesuits and the Lutherans understand that no, we're participating in for the sake of the public good, but we do it in the name of Christ. So, and that comes from that deep vocation to serve the neighbor in the world. Okay, so like healthcare, I mentioned that because I knew I was coming to Rochester. I figured, be contextually sensitive. But who would have known 20 years ago the level of disruption that's come to all of healthcare, way before affordable healthcare, but just with a lot of big factors driving it. We're all nervous now about the conversation about the Affordable Education Act that Obama was talking about. Because if you start fixing this thing with a wrench, we're very worried that you could end up destroying a whole bunch of things, just like everybody in healthcare has been worried. Complicated, huh? But there are driving forces that are creating change, disruptive forces that just can't be ignored. So this fall at Luther College, we went through these 5, and I could talk at about an hour's length on any one of the 5 because they're really big and complicated. The one you hear the most about on the press and creates the most hysteria is the cost and debt spiral for students. Now, often this is actually poorly interpreted. You hear the worst cases every time. Someone comes out with $100,000 of debt and so forth. Well, it's generally a story there. And if you go to all of our Lutheran colleges now, you can discover that there's a sticker price and then there's a price that people actually pay depending upon the whole financial aid packaging that goes on. So there's just a deep discount unless you're very wealthy and your kid is not all that strong academically. I mean, that's how it works. So, but very few people pay the sticker price, and they've been working very hard, the boards and the administrations, and we're really pretty much on a par across not only the Lutherans but the independent colleges of the Midwest in how this pricing works. But anyway, what you're going to hear is not that this discipline's been pursued vigorously, but you're going to hear the scary part. Nevertheless, it is scary. When you start saying going out 5 to 10 years, you project what it costs. Why is higher education so expensive? Well, why is healthcare so expensive? Because you need to fund expertise. That's why. And you need to fund personal contacts. The most valuable stuff of residential education is that people actually get to know their teachers. And their teachers come with excellent PhDs from all over the world. And they've come and they're trying to raise their families and make a living. And here they come with their own debts. You can't just get this for free. So that cost thing and how it gets managed is a big one. Second one is the digitization of everything. That's my phrase for it. But I mean, the impact of technology, again, just think about what's happened in healthcare. Just amazing. Well, now go over to learning systems. Now you hear a lot about who does distance learning or not. That's kind of a marker. That's what the press talks about. And I've been to lots of faculties that say we don't do distance learning here. And I say, rubbish. And they say, what do you mean rubbish? I said, well, of course you do distance learning. Just the question is whether distance is coming in or you're reaching out. Because the kids are already sitting in classroom with tablets and iPads and the whole thing. And they're pulling stuff off Wikipedia. When I was teaching in Augsburg, I remember teaching 8 in the morning. And it's just everybody half asleep, you know, in a required religion class. Anyway, I asked the question, this kid gives this brilliant answer, and I said, wow, I thought he'd really done the reading. He was just pulling it off of Wikipedia. So, at the same time, that's learning. That's kind of shabby research, but it is a kind of research. How are you going to build a library today? Oh, it's really interesting. The big question in all these schools is how are we going to get a big enough pipe in to have the communication systems that are going to be coming the next 10 years. And nobody really knows. But that giant sucking sound in higher education is not jobs going to Mexico, it's technology. Huh? It's just everywhere, it's pervasive. But it's also, eventually, higher education has not accomplished much in the way of savings out of that yet, but they will. They'll figure out ways that this not only adds cost, but it will somehow affect the whole economy on the expense side, savings side as well. And then, the third one, I could spend a lot on this one, especially a place like Zumbro, changes in American communities, especially faith communities. The Lutheran colleges were embedded in the congregations. And the congregations were sending their sons and daughters to our colleges. That was a deep conviction. And in a place like Zumbro, the number of hands that went up represents that legacy at least. The question is that the future. The proportion of Lutheran students in all these schools has steadily declined. That's not all bad, because it means that you also have a much more complex teaching, learning environment. It's less of an enclave. It has some strengths to it. But there was a time even which the national churches directly supported, especially the seminaries. When I first started as president of Luther Seminary, they were funding at 38% in support of the seminary, and now it's under 5%. And the colleges lost that level of direct support a long time ago, but the sense that the church supports the colleges very strong. So how is that going to work in the next generation? You know, you see this changing of the demography of the Lutheran Church, and you say, we can't just play it the way we played it in 1955. It just isn't going to work. Not to cry about it, but to say that something deep is changing. Is there a way now to play that forward? I think the answer is yes, but we do have to rethink it deeply. And then the changing identities of this generation as young people. I could write all kinds of scripts about this. The music they listen to, the way they their social experience being on the web, and you know, selfies, all kinds of things you could talk about here. Generally, when people my age talk about it, it sounds like a caricature of young people, and it's not fair. So you have to say, oh no, who are these kids? Huh? What's it like? Those who've been teaching, say, confirmation can tell you the difference that's happened in the years coming through. There was a time in which it looked like confirmation was just going into the tank. And then churches learned, no, we have to be appropriate to who these young people are. And they're happy to learn the faith and the relationships, the belonging, the believing that are necessary, and behaving that are all part of the faith. But you have to do it in their way. So this, of course, is a place where great teachers in these colleges do so remarkably well. This is actually, I tell you, I haven't gone from teaching in the seminary to teaching at Augsburg. It was really sobering to try to figure out how to relate to these kids. There's a big gap from the time of when I ever taught with them. And I watched the faculty at Luther College, as I did at Augsburg and at Cal Lutheran and St. Olaf. They just do fabulous work relating to young people, creating an environment where they feel the challenge and the interest. These are all bright people. They wouldn't be in doing this if not. And now they're doing spectacular things, helping them be involved in the faculty's own research projects and internships and things that are about broader learning, not just inculcating the discipline of whatever it is we're teaching, but having hands-on learning experiences. So teaching and learning is cracking open largely because there's such a different generation of students, and good teachers are doing that, as always. Huh? And then this last one is kind of a bombshell, but it's very interesting and very complicated, important and dangerous at the same time. That is, we always used to measure excellence. I used to do a lot of accrediting visits for the Association of Theological Schools and for the North Central Association, or now that's the Higher Learning Commission. It was always about how many PhDs do you have on this faculty, how many books do you have in the library, is this a Phi Beta Kappa college or not, that kind of thing. But now that's not really what the interest. The question is, what have you promised that they are going to learn, and how can you document that they have learned what you've promised? Whew. And of course, this one has all kinds of forms to it. It can be simply done mechanically, like some bureaucrat decides they have to learn this, this, and this. You know, like sometimes it's happened in secondary education when the federal government starts setting standards. How would you do that in colleges and universities? It's just scary to think about somebody sitting in an office. Well, I think, and then they write it down, and everybody has to do that, or you get a B, or a C, or a D, and you lose your economic base with the government. So it's scary, but it's also the right thing to do. It's like focusing on health results and outcomes. It's scary if somebody else is going to determine what they are, but actually the metrics of health are proving to be very important and valuable and valid because we have so much more information than we can manage than we once did. So the analogy is pretty good, both the hazard and the possibility of that. Anyway, it's inescapable, it's what's happening, it's what's coming, and accreditation is just burdened with this, making this move from demonstrating the excellence of what we teach to documenting the educational results that we've delivered. Okay, now I think, this is the other part of what we're doing now at Luther. This is a little more of a commercial, but it's something that would be being done in other places. Just I know these are my 5 points, so they're being done at Luther, you know. But you know that book by Jim Collins, Great by Choice. He did the, Good to Great book, great, interesting stuff. Not really about education, but about how organizations actually do well. And they studied institutions, organizations, companies mostly, who outperformed their rivals by tenfold over a period of 15 years. They measured it on their stock valuations. It's hard to do that in higher education. But anyway, what they discovered was that it wasn't just the place that was the most radically innovative. He says resistance to change is not the hallmark of mediocrity. It's rather inconsistency. That's the hallmark of mediocrity. The institutions that are great by choice, and just start thinking about this in higher education now, it's really fun to try to think about it, are those who know what they're there for and adapt and do it in different ways in different times, but sustain that and deliver it. And then the trust, the bond of trust is built with those who depend on them to do their work well, and they keep thriving and growing. Others are going like this, and they just keep coming. So what we're thinking about right now at the board this month with the college is what are those, what we're calling strategic disciplines, that a place like Luther College, I don't think we put any name in there for our colleges, need to practice in the next 5 to 10 years to ensure that we carry forward what has been a great thing. So the 5 things we've identified are, in the coming 2 months, we have to consistently and creatively practice these strategic disciplines. One is identifying, communicating, and delivering the return on investment that students and their families make. The return on investment is a little risky word because it can sound so mercenary, but we are talking about a lot of money. So that's one thing. What we're investing is a lot of fun in this. This is actually an expensive enterprise. But actually we're investing something more important than the money. We're sending our sons and daughters. Talk about what's valuable. And we're entrusting them to these institutions to say, there's something wonderful to happen here. So we better be clear about what that is that we're promising and be able to show that they have received it. And this is really interesting because these colleges have had such a strong sense of mutuality, confidence, community, that sometimes they haven't been as fierce in naming it than just saying, well, we all know that. Around Luther College, they use this phrase, well, we all have the secret sauce of Luther College. And I think, well, that's good if you're inside, but actually, I'm not interested much in secret sauces. I'm interested in what is it that we really can name. I was with a president from a college in Upper New York State, small college, quite like Luther, and he actually used the word secret sauce, and so I went after him because it was easier. He was somebody else. And he said, well, no, really, I bet it's the same thing for you. We decided that it's a social value. It's the community thing. Is that they're learning in a particular way, and that fits with what Luther talks about, a community of learning and a community of faith. And it's not either or, and they don't really mess up with each other. That's the Lutheran thing, community of learning, community of faith, but that sense of community. So we really emphasize, even when kids come to visit, welcome. This is a place where you thrive personally the next 4 or 5 years, 4 years. Anyway. And when they come, we say to the entering students, now stand up and say with me, I belong at Luther College. So that sense of belonging to a community is really one of the heart and core pieces that all these Lutheran colleges practice. So someplace in there is something that we're working on that has to do with learning, of course, cognition and learning skills and information. But this is one of the ways, in some way, that we have to figure out then how does technology support that. But that isn't just an information dump. Huh? Some of my most profound formative experiences philosophically were in my inorganic chemistry class, where a faculty member stepped aside and they said, I'm going to talk about quantum mechanics and describe how this creates a whole world of uncertainty. I'd never heard of science. That was supposed to be quick, quick, quick. And all of a sudden, we were dealing with the whole question of indeterminacy in science, and it was just like, oh, the world opened. I remember, I could almost recite that lecture. I was just writing like crazy, because I'd seen this periodic table on the wall, and that was boom, boom, boom. If you just get that down, memorize that stuff, that's science, right? As well, that's getting started, but that ain't science, man. It isn't science until you understand that that is a model that describes what we're trying to work with. And that model will vary as we have different experience and interpretation of it. Well, now that was not a theology class or something, but so you have a place where a broader set of learning, not just, again, an information dump, can't be impersonal. Because that was the place, all of a sudden, some kid from a little high school in southeastern Minnesota group started to grow up. I thought thoughts I hadn't thought before. So identify, communicate, deliver that, and then attain superb learning results in innovative learning communities. There's that community word again. I don't think we have any choice in these colleges but to sustain that sense of community. This is true of Gustavus, Concordia, Augsburg, St. Olaf, and Luther, for example, the importance of music. You can't have a choir or an orchestra without some community. You can't do that just episodically. You can't have teams and athletics. It's really important to how young people grow up, maybe especially, I don't know, I was going to say maybe especially young men, but I see these women athletes, and it's just fabulous, the way they work in teams and how they think about who they are. And they tend to be some of our brightest and best academics as well. But it's happening concurrently in an environment of some kind. So now we have to figure out how we're going to deliver that and practice that. At the same time, it can't all be confined in Decorah, Iowa, because there's a big world. So how will this is a place where Rochester is already very important. The nursing program is a very good example of that. But it will also be true for business internships and social work and education, student teaching. Some of these things are already in place, but we're now developing what we call the Center for careers and callings. Here are the two sides again, huh? Careers and callings. It's about careers, yeah, it's plural, because you're not going to just have one job. But we're going to try to give you an education where you kind of know who you are well enough, with a sense of calling and what your gifts are, that you can go and really do well here, and here as you process through life. Anyway, that's going to have to be interactive education. You can't just quite do that hothouse. Maybe the first couple of years are going to continue to be sort of hothouse, but it's going to have to open the model. And then you start thinking, all right, how can the new technologies serve us? Where can we have cohorts, and where can we have support things? We're already, I was talking to John Lund last week. He had on his phone, he was tracking 50 flights that were coming back from J-term, from Asia, Africa, and Europe. And they're all coming to the storms on the East Coast. They're all being diverted. And he was kind of keeping track of how these students were ever going to get back to Decorah, because we wanted them back in Decorah in February, you know. So it's already global. But I like to think about how will Luther College or any of these colleges be and have a portal to a larger world. And a portal is chosen as a metaphor because it's used in the virtual technology environment, but also has to do with the doorway that goes both ways. Huh? So that's kind of bubble, or point two. And the third one, enact the Lutheran way, the third Lutheran way of Lutheran excellence, which isn't sectarian or secular. Have you ever had Daryl Jodak come down here and talk about Lutheran higher education? Well, put that on your list. Daryl is a good friend of mine for many, many years. Anyway, he was at Muhlenberg College, which is way more Jewish students than Lutherans, Jews and Roman Catholics, more than the small quotient of Lutherans. But he had a chair in the religion department there, and he said, well, that's a great opportunity. We want to be a Lutheran college in this environment. They've built the best Lutheran Jewish dialogue system that any place has, and actually helped move the whole Lutheran church forward in the dialogue with Jews. It was really, really important. Then he went to Gustavus in the Bernhardson chair, which they invented, you know, kind of around him, to provide a kind of thought leadership on how do we do Lutheran higher education. He did wonderful work there. When I was invited to go to Augsburg, I said to the Bernhard Christensen chair, first I said to Bill Frame, you know, you really don't have any money, do you? He said, no, I don't. I said, well, that's all right. I don't need any because I'm retired. So you pay me what you can, and let's invent what they did at Gustavus. So we built the Bernhard Christensen chair and then raised the money. Martha Stortz now holds that chair. But Daryl gives a wonderful interpretation. It's amazingly simple, but it's deep. You can take any of these pieces and keep chasing it. He said there in higher education in North America, it is either fundamentally, in most cases, secular or sectarian. Kind of interesting to think about this. Now that's kind of a fierce word. A sectarian can sound really negative, but it actually comes from the European distinction between the state churches and the non-state churches. And what he means by that is there are places that are secular are either intentionally neutral, quote unquote, about religion. You can't be neutral, but he pretends you are, or at least adversely oriented to it. A lot of academic work is adversely oriented to the faith. It's just true. Or we have Christian schools, American evangelical colleges, very good ones, like Pepperdine, Bethel, Northeast, Northwestern. You have signed faith statements when you come as a student. And this is emphatically a Christian environment, and you have Christian instruction. And you won't have anybody in the ELCA schools, and maybe some Missouri students, the Wisconsin Synod, but on the whole, the Lutheran educational tradition would not insist on faith statements from entering students to be signed, or certain, you know, it just doesn't work that way. It's not an enforced sectarian community. In fact, it's rather a hospitality. And this is where he goes. He says, this third way is kind of complicated, but it is very intentional. One of my friends says, we define ourselves by our center rather than our boundaries. Think about that one, huh? So if these institutions remain centered in the confidence that we have in the faith in Jesus Christ, then they tried to practice the radical hospitality of Jesus himself, and he was more inclusive than anybody. Huh? Then you start thinking about working from this center, how that works. Anyway, that's another multiple speeches, but I'd encourage you, if you can get Joe Doc to come down here, we're trying to get him to come down to Luther College next year when the new president is there, to have a workshop with faculty and board, because it's actually very interesting to think about. Not simple, but there is actually a third way that isn't either the denial of the faith or have the faith take over the academic discipline. We always are a both-and tradition. Anyway, so we need to enact that. There's a lot of pieces to it, and we're talking about those, but I won't talk about them now. The fifth one is to align our human, financial, physical, I should have said, and virtual assets to serve the mission, because it's all this stuff. And the temptation is that we try to do a little of this, a little of that, and we're trying to compete with everybody over here and somebody else over here. You're going to have to be great by choice, you have to be very disciplined, focusing on what is our intended keeping of our promise, and delivering it. Ted Hesper, who was the president of Notre Dame for a long time, once said, well, not just once, he said it a lot, that he wanted Notre Dame to become the finest Catholic university since the Middle Ages. And when I was at Luther Seminary, I thought, wow, could I raise money with a line like that? And he did, but he also meant it, and they tried to enact it. It was a long discipline. He was a long time as the president of Notre Dame. And then they had to figure out what they meant by that, you know, in higher education. And we had lots of our seminary graduates who went off and did their PhDs at Notre Dame. It wasn't a repressive atmosphere of Catholicism. They were very hospitable Lutherans, and worship, very interesting. But they were Catholic, and you knew it, and they knew what they meant by it. So that's kind of, they tried to align everything there, and I'm not sure that means that everybody has to have, like Notre Dame does, touchdown Jesus, you know, the big image of that in the center of Notre Dame. But there are ways that they actually practice that. So how are we going to make everything work toward what we're really trying to get to? This is a discipline for governance and administrations especially. And the fifth one is a discipline for constituencies. Rally the constituencies of the college, in this case Luther's constituency, to share their great by choice calling. I don't use the word calling casually here. I really think that we have received a legacy from those who built these things that was informed by, bears the character of a faith that we're doing this because God wants us to do it. That's our calling as the Lutheran Church in North America, is to build institutions, huh? And we built great ones. And so stewarding them now into this generation, and the tumultuous changes that are coming in higher education, is going to require a large buy-in, financially for one thing, but also a constituency of engagement, of sending your sons and daughters to these places with the confidence that they're going to get something that will equip them for their whole lives that they won't get somewhere else. I'll stop there. Let's talk. What are your questions? Thoughts?
Probably just to mention, we'd like to, we're taping, so we'd like to hear your questions and be able to pick that up. Lots of questions that I'm sure are out there. Would you raise your hand and we'll get the mic around to you and let's continue the conversation. Dr. Tiede, where are we at?
I'm accountable to Dr. Susan Jenkins.
All right, Susan.
Softball question, I'm being facetious. I think there's a real challenge in the ELCA in terms of budget and support from the congregations. At the same time, the ELCA remains a mainline Protestant faith that has this whole hierarchy of higher education that we're supporting. Could you speak to the challenge between the ELCA and support for the colleges?
I'll be glad for this. It may take me a little bit though. Let me start with two stories. One was in my early years at Luther Seminary, after the merger of the churches, there was this great expectation that suddenly there would be this great support base coming through the national church and the synods, and that we were going to go from 38% back to 50%, which they'd been in 1980. And the first year, the bottom just dropped out. We had a $500,000 deficit my first year in the job. And then for the first thing, you're mad for a while, then you say, I can't be mad anymore, I got to figure this out. I could whine once about the lack of church support and asking for support from places like all of you and the churches, and then you couldn't say that again. That was just dead. That was a dead message. So someone said to me, you have to figure out what is the opportunity in this adversity. And this goes right to your question. But I figured out it was not only not helpful to be mad at the DELCA, whoever that was, but I had to rethink who it actually was. And then I said, who's going to care, not for Luther Seminary, but for the future of the leadership of the church? And only the church would care for that, especially the seminary. Huh? It's more complicated than the college. Pretty interesting. The college publics get broader. But in the seminary, it was just the church. So it turns out, where's the money in the church? It's in the hip pockets of the people sitting in the pew, frankly. So we had to find the people, we had people give us quite a bit of money who didn't even care about Luther Seminary. But they did care about the future, the leadership of the church, and where their pastors were going to come from. So in the process, that was a kind of an education. So it was about who is the church here? And in that, I began to see something that's now become, I think, more evident to everybody. I had to learn it early because it just had to, we had to regroup. I remember talking with Rick Foss, the president of Luther. At the time, they were trying to push to establish the vocation and education unit, and he said, this is really important. Put a lot of energy in trying to get that done. So I said, why? Because I was already a little beyond that in some sense in my thinking about the national organization. And he said, well, it's not for money, you know. I said, I know that. He said, no, but we have to be on the screen of the national church, that the colleges and universities are that, and seminaries are that important to the church. So we got to have that unit. Now that unit has been dissolved. Now we could be, again, all kind of cranky, but frankly, Methodists, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Lutherans, the national organizations that we built in the 19th century denominational model are imploding. It doesn't mean the church is going away. But we have really a serious organizational issue that's been addressed once, twice, 3 times already in the national organization. It's going to have to be addressed more. Meanwhile, are we going to wait for that organization to somehow rally and save the seminaries and the colleges? I don't think so. We have great people in there who are our bishops and our leaders, and they're going to do the best they can, but it's just profoundly changing what the expectations that were built by the Commission of 70. I like to say we built a great mainline denomination just in time for that to be over. And I don't say that cynically, just factually. It was an older generation of people who designed that and didn't have the institutional savoir-faire to figure out, we got to build a different kind of design, huh? So, now back to your question. The ELCA colleges, seminaries for sure, but colleges too, especially in this part of the country, are going to depend upon their network of congregations and members who will sustain this work. That's why I put it this way. This sheet, of course, was handed down on Mount Sinai, you understand that. Rally its constituencies, plural. So, I think one of those constituencies is the national church, by the way. So, what Rick Foss was after, we still need to be after. When the meeting of Lutheran College presidents happens next week, we're all still concerned about how will the national organization in the ELCA and the Missouri Synod support their institutions. In the case of Missouri Synod, by the way, they're facing a very interesting problem because they're trying to get a hold of their boards so they can elect their own boards instead of having them appointed and loaded with people who are trying to control them from the church, frankly, and try to say, no, let's get people who will help make it happen, carry them forward. We're way past that in the ELCA. The college boards especially, but not even the seminary boards, are increasingly responsible for sustaining the mission rather than just oversight and control. So that's governance culture thing has already happened in the ELCA, and that happened very consciously in the early years of the ELCA. We had to go get bylaw changes through the Conference of Bishops, all kinds of stuff, but they all said, no, we really need to do this because we want these institutions to be strong and we don't want to choke them off. So one of our constituencies is the national church, and if they understand and are realistic about that, then the way in which the colleges build their constituencies of support, their ownership, their stakeholders, who's going to care about it? Well, we're not going to depend upon that national organization because it doesn't have the capacity to do that. Where is the capacity, And the capacity and the wisdom have to be wed. So this conversation, this is the kind of chance that college presidents don't want to miss now, to come to these congregations and say, the ELCA, frankly, it's you. Now, getting more soft ones, Susan? I don't know. But you hear systemic change in that, So under bullet 3 above, changes to American communities, notably faith communities, that also has to do with cultural, structural change of the place of denominations, even in the communities. Another soft one here.
Yeah, I got another one for you. As the mother of 2 young adults, I find my conversation with them about their careers and callings is very interesting, because it seems they have a sense that there is a right calling out there that they need to find, as opposed to developing themselves as a person and then looking around to see what work there is to do. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
That's also a kind of a developmental thing. It's real complicated because when you're young, very young especially, you want to know, what am I going to do with my life? And you're looking for something clear. And that's a very natural thing. So part of it is the sifting and sorting that happens when you go to college. You find out you really are motivated and better at some things than others. That's why working with your teachers is so important. I bet if we had time, we could go around this room and hear wonderful stories about how teachers, especially in the first couple of years of college, opened your eyes. And they said, you know what you could do, well, you know what you ought to think about. Something happened. So that engagement, but that concern, when the Lilly Endowment gave out these large grants on the theological exploration of vocation for colleges that had had strong Christian identities, the Lutherans just rose to the top. We were ready. Augsburg was really ready. Luther was really ready. St. Olaf, Gustavus, Concordia, they all got these grants. And it tended to focus a little bit about who's going to be pastors, Even sitting at the seminary, I said, no, don't do that. I mean, I'm all for favor of pastors. I are one, It's nothing. That's great. But this is really about, for Lutherans, how people find a sense of calling in their worlds. Home and family, world of work, public lives, places of communities of faith, all 4 of those, the classic ones that Luther knew about. So, that's why we say callings plural. But there was then a temptation to say, and that metaphor that comes largely out of American evangelicalism, it's really a sweet promise. God has a plan for your life, It tends to sound like just in the singular. Well, that might be, but most people find that the pathways through life are more like this, and quite often you have the deepest sense of God calling, coming to you at a moment of vulnerability or failing or loss or grief. you know, when you get old like I am, you look back and say, where did I sense God was calling me in life? And it wasn't necessarily at the points of greatest performance or triumph. So anyway, part of what we try to do then is, that's why the plural is so important. Invest awareness that this sense of calling is actually having to do with a relationship with God. You actually are called and sent in your baptism. And I don't like a lot of the emphasis, frankly, in the church about water and baptism. I think it gets way over the top. It sounds like holy water to me. But when you start getting to the level of saying, Luther says, it's not the water, it's the Word. Well, what does the Word do? The Word names and claims you. You're one of ours. God says, this one's mine. Or as one of my friends who's a pastor in a tough neighborhood, he says, families bring in, they're going to baptize this kid just because grandma wants him baptized, and we know we'll never see him again. And so he said, after they make the promises, and the parents and sponsors make the promise, and then the congregation makes the promise, before they do, he said, just a minute. I want to make it clear to these parents and sponsors that if you don't bring this kid to church, we're going to come and get him. So, at that deep level, the calling happens at the point that this child is named and claimed. Now, the unfolding of that is a relationship. So I think if, again, communities of learning and communities of faith have a little dimension to them and lots of relationship with teachers and stuff, this ain't cheap. This is pretty complicated. And this ain't at home either. Because if they're living in your basement, it's not the same conversation. Some of you know this well. Anyway, so, but in that environment, to nurture that and then start sending them out even while they're in college, that's what we're after. All right.
Maybe that's time for one or two more questions. Steve?
I'll try to make the answers briefer.
I have a Jesuit question. We're in the bicentennial restoration of the Jesuit order. And as I understand it, they were dissolved everywhere except in Russia. Catherine the Great, whose background was Lutheran, became a Orthodox. She refused to follow the Pope's edict or order to dissolve the Jesuit order. And it was because of the colleges. So I'm wondering how they did that. How did they so inspire Catherine and the country?
I mentioned something like the Jesuits as if I knew what I was talking about. And that happened to me already earlier this week, and I made this connection. It's not an accident that the Jesuits and the Lutherans are playing together now in higher education because they were formed in a tussle. I hadn't known that. I had never heard this story before either. So I don't have no clue. Next question. But let's just think how interesting it is. And Catherine the Great and all that. You start putting all kinds of stuff together here. A German, Lutheran, in Russia, somehow valuing that educational alternative in the context of Orthodoxy. Am I hearing you right? Whew, never heard that story. I better go read it. Other questions?
Yeah, another one?
They don't all have to be that elegant.
Yes.
It's more a comment. For-profit education.
Yeah.
And outcomes, I think, are important, especially in assessing what's happening with some of the for-profit sector, which I think has been preying on some constituencies, such as veterans, for example, or so-called alternative students, coming later in their life or whatever. But do you have perspective on the for-profits, whose center is ultimately to make a profit?
Yeah. I think the emergence of for-profit education is actually a good whack on the side of the head for all of us. So I don't want to discount it. It's a real, the thing that's irritating is how the press makes it sound like, and they ride this curve, that we're going to do it for you at 20% of the cost and whatever. And then you start looking at the debt ratios that have been built up here, way over what's happened in, say, Lutheran higher education. To get the real statistics, you actually need some information here to value how this has worked. And we mentioned veterans. There's some very sad stories, but not everywhere. For some people, this has actually worked for them. So there's for-profit and then there's for-profit, you know. And so you have to actually differentiate that. It's not black and white, it's, here it comes. And you look at the scale of the educational costs of public education and what we now call private education, or it's interesting. In Southern California, for example, California's had a hugely strong public university system. And then they started to cut away the values. All of a sudden, California Lutheran is having a big surge in its enrollments because you can attend California Lutheran for almost the same price as one of the Cal State enterprises. And so people are saying, oh, I'm going to go there now. Now, if you do actual comparisons, not just sticker prices, you really have to go into this deeply. Then you start looking at real costs. And then the question about the for-profit is what is the true cost and what is the yield. Another one that's pretty interesting is there's all this excitement about MOOCs, you know, the massive online courses. This was going to solve everything. Well, it isn't, but it's pretty interesting. And so there are certain kinds of things they figured at a very high level. They got 100,000 people signing up for some exotic form of a course on physics. And people from all over the world, it turns out only about 10 people finished it for credit and paid dearly for it. And they weren't very well supported, but still. In fact, Stanford, MIT, these are all the places inventing these things. What we're seeing is a lot of alternative experimentation happening. And we can't sit in the splendid isolation of Lutheran higher education and say, well, those people. No, what are we learning from that that can actually benefit the way our students learn and are equipped? Also, Luther has only undergraduate education. Augsburg has kicked open the windows to several. They're really a regional small university with lots of graduate things functioning here and there. Cal Lutheran is actually being carried economically by its graduate programs. It's very interesting how these models work. But if you focus on, especially just the undergraduate experience, that's what most of us think about when we think about Lutheran education. That is only, for many people, the first step into their graduate work. So then they're playing in these other arenas real fast. Some of them are academic, some of them are training institutes, and some of them are programs run by IBM for their growth of employees. So what's really interesting is how composite this thing is now, and then it's within that complexity that we have to make the case that this experience is the best place for your student to thrive and grow and become competent and committed for the world ahead.
David, we want to thank you for opening up, answering a lot of thoughts here. That thought between sectarian and secular and the focus and the centering, that was a most helpful analysis. 2 months, I think, from now, the first Sunday of April, we're going to do the follow-up to this. We're having Rick Foss, who is the interim president at Luther Seminary, with us to talk about what's happening among seminaries of the church and how we can unpack some of those issues and talk about them. And next, we start a 3-part series on...
Next week actually is the annual meeting, just a reminder, and it starts at 9:15 upstairs in the sanctuary. 2 weeks from now, we'll start a 3-part series on mysticism and some of what we can glean from the spiritual traditions that we don't often talk about in the Lutheran Church.
Did you get that? Mysticism in 3 weeks. No, a week from... Go in peace, serve the Lord.